The world of work has changed more in the past 2 years than it otherwise would have changed in the next 20 to 50 years. Employees, entrepreneurs all around the world showed that you could achieve fantastic business results with a remote and flexible workforce. And now that things are slowly opening up, business is starting to get back to normal. I feel like many organizations are in such a rush to get back to the normal that they're failing to understand and really appreciate that the world of work has changed forever. Welcome, and if you're new here, I'm Kieran Panchal, and here on this channel I help you navigate the crazy decade that is your 20s. And so if you're trying to figure out life just like me, consider joining me on this journey by subscribing down below. Now, those of you guys who've been following for a little while know that I've been working in corporate UK or corporate world for the past 7 years, both in organizations, working for different clients, and obviously remotely for the past couple of years through COVID. And so because of generationally and my experience, this video is going to be very much focused on my views on flexible working from a corporate perspective. Now, I know the flexible working debate is one that actually differs quite dramatically from generation to generation. So I'm not going to by any means cover every generational view just because I can't give that perspective, but I wanted to give my view on a millennial's perspective on flexible working, how things have changed over the past 2 years, and what things I think organizations can do more of in the next 2 to 5 years as everyone, including organizations and employees, figure out what the hell flexible working means for them. So let's wind it back to the origins, the history of the traditional working day and working week. So back in the kind of 19th century, around 1850 time, when we were going through industrialization, everyone was coming into work at the same time, everyone was leaving work at the same time, and everyone was taking their breaks at the same time. And over the last 150 years, as we moved away from industrialization into a more service-based economy, many of those rules that we became normal back then have just carried on. But the one thing that's changed more so than switching from industrialization to service-based economy is the fact that we now have technology, and we haven't really adapted our working week, our working day, our working life to technology. Technology allows you to work whenever you want, wherever you want, and whoever you want to work with. And technology has had such a dramatic impact in so many parts of our lives. But I feel like the way we work is actually one of the ways that technology has had the least impact. To take out the communication part of technology in terms of the way we work, but technology really hasn't made any impact or dent to how we work in terms of the traditional workday at all. And then came along COVID. Literally overnight, organizations had to adapt to their employees working away from their office, at their homes, in different places throughout the country, and even in different places throughout the globe. And what started off with what I think was a bit of trepidation from organizations, with a fear of not knowing how their business might be impacted, how productivity and usefulness of their employees would reduce. I think organizations were actually very, very surprised with the way people worked, particularly initially when we went into lockdown and we went to remote working. In my organization at least, and I found myself doing this as well, we were working a lot longer hours. We were putting in a lot more time and possibly effort even than when we were in the office in the initial parts of lockdown. And I think there are really kind of two key reasons for this. One is that people were fearful. No one had any idea what shutting down the economy and COVID would do for everyone. And people were fearful for their jobs. Job security was not a given. Whereas you might be working at a job where everything was hunky-dory before, things all of a sudden didn't seem so secure. And so you had to work, you had to try and make yourself indispensable. You had to put in those hours to make sure that your company had no reason to either furlough you or to let you go completely. And then the other reason why people ended up working so much harder and so much longer was that people actually didn't have much else to do. Now, yes, that was partially because everything was closed, but that was also partially because something I'm going to go into a bit more detail in another video on, but I think a lot of people actually just didn't have any interests or hobbies outside of work. Over the past 10, 15, 20 years, the idea of this ideal worker, the person who's committed to their job, and that is the person who will, accelerate and succeed at work, is the person that only focuses on work and nothing else. And I feel like when people were at home and they had this spare time, people just didn't know what to do. And so all they did know what to do was to work. And that's why they were working weekends, evenings, because there was nothing else for them to do. And that's kind of toxic in its own way. And I said, I'll do a separate video on why I think that is a bad thing. But I think those two reasons about job security and about just not doing anything else were the main reasons why people took that opportunity or just felt like they had to work super, super hard in the beginning of lockdown. And what started as maybe a short sprint, what people said, you know what, we're just gonna, work really hard for the next 6 months or 3 months or whatever to make sure we get over the initial hump, I've actually seen has translated into no longer being a sprint and people continuing to work that hard and put those long hours in now 2 years later, even after we initially went into lockdown. And so what became and what started as a sprint has actually become a new normal, which I think is dangerous in its own right, but it's just crazy how that has changed over the course of the last 2 years. Throughout the second half of 2021, as the world kind of slowly unraveled and started opening up a little bit after the COVID lockdowns, many people and many organizations started to drift back into the office, some slower than others, some quicker than others. But I can't help but feel that many organizations were so quick or so desperate to get back to normal that they haven't actually taken the time to appreciate and understand how the world of work and how people's minds have changed. And I think this is a part of why we're seeing the great resignation at the moment, why we're seeing so many people do career changes, is because I don't really think any organizations have spent enough time thinking about how the world of work in terms of how we work has changed, because they've been so desperate to just get back to normal and get back to what we were doing before without really thinking about how things have actually changed. The term flexible working, even 5 years ago, was really just used to talk about parenting, mothers and carers, and really talking about kind of time and location of work. And even the legislation written by the UK government pretty much echoes this in terms of how they define flexible working. But it is so much more than that. Instead, I like to define flexible working as respecting and trusting your employees to work in the best interests of their own lives, as well as the organization's objectives. Throughout the end of 2021 and no doubt into 2022, organizations have adopted all sorts of different approaches to flexible working. Some have had hybrid approaches where their policies state that sometimes you have to be in the office, sometimes you have to be remote. Other companies have said you have to be in all the time. Other companies have said you have to be remote all of the time. But I think there's only really one solution to this, and that is something that many organizations find really difficult, and it baffles me as to why organizations find it so difficult. But that is to trust your employees to make the right decision. And that is, if it's beneficial to their teamwork and achieving the outcome they need to be in the office or be in a co-located area, then they will do that. But if they can also crack on with whatever they need to remotely, they will also do that. And I think that idea of trust is a thing I think that organizations are failing to grasp really well. The message I would give to any people watching this who are maybe leaders in any organizations is you hire people, you make sure they've got the right skills, they've got the right qualifications, because you want to trust them, right? You go through an elongated application and all that type of hiring process to make sure that you hire the people that you can trust. Yet when it comes down to work and the way that you actually get people to work, you essentially don't trust them. And so when we think about this new way of working and this new world of flexible working, trusting your employees to do what is right to achieve the outcome needed, I think is the only way and the only approach that organizations can really take. If I was to coach an organization today on how they can think about and adopt flexible working moving forward, I'd really focus and tell them to focus on 3 things. The first one is give your staff and employees the tools to work flexibly. Now, many of us, particularly in the corporate world, are very blessed in terms that we've got very capable laptops and phones and all this type of stuff. But many organizations that you probably would expect their employees to have these type of equipment actually don't. And so it's kind of a way as an almost kind of a soft push from some organizations to get their staff back into the office by, giving them subpar equipment so they have to come back into the office to use the better PCs or the better screens or whatever. And so my advice would be to any organization is to equip your people with the right tools they need to do the job wherever it is they need to do. The second would be to make it a more discussed topic. Flexible working previously, and from what I've seen from my experience, even to this day now, is still sometimes a taboo subject. It seems like when you talk about flexible working, you're essentially just looking for an excuse and talking about an excuse to not work. And that whole taboo, it frustrates me so much, but the only way to get around it is to discuss it more. Discuss it more in open forums with large groups of people in the organization, and have it as a topic that is discussed right at the highest level and right at the lowest level as well. Get everyone talking about how flexible working has worked for them, how flexible working maybe hasn't worked for them, what has been successful, what hasn't been successful, and just have it as a discussed topic, so it's not something that people feel afraid to ask for. Because if people feel afraid to ask for it, that is probably the worst possible case or worst possible scenario to be in. And so the more it is discussed, the more willing people feel to share their opinions and thoughts and their requests when it comes to flexible working than they otherwise would. And the final coaching point is to get your leadership teams to set an example. If there's anyone watching this video that is maybe part of a leadership team or coaching an organization's leadership, would be to think about their example, the example they are setting. If they are so keen to get back into the office and get back to normal, then everybody else, the army of workers that do the operational tasks that keep the business running on a day-to-day basis, will ultimately follow suit. Now, I know, as I said at the beginning of this video, the flexible working debate is very different when you go generation by generation. And obviously the leadership people are probably going to be a little older and therefore of a different generation. But they have to be the ones that set the example to say that flexible working is okay, but not just in their words, but by their actions also. And by doing that, they encourage more people to follow their suit as well. And this helps address the topic too of it being taboo. If the leadership team are doing it, it's something that people will be a lot more willing to want to do and actually enact themselves. This debate on flexible working is going to rage on for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And there's going to be a lot of trial and probably a lot of error, both from the organization's perspective and the employee's perspective, as everyone tries to figure out what is right for them. And it will be different for different businesses and it will be different for different industries. And that's why I think trial and error is the only way. But trial and error has to be done by listening to the people, not via a small group of one generational leadership people making decisions for the entire organization. That is what's not going to work. And those organizations that do listen to all different parts of their business and maybe even have different flexible working approaches for different parts of their business are ultimately the ones that I think will succeed. But this is a very fiery debate and lots of people have different views on either side. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about flexible working, what your thoughts are about going in the office or staying remote or working whenever, wherever, in the comments down below. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. But thank you all for watching this video and I'll catch you guys on the next one.